Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian congregation of Mendon and Uxbridge. I'm so glad each of you is with us today. Today is a special service. We are celebrating 201 years in this church building. Today, music will be provided by Matthew Marion. The postlude and the prelude are on the organ, and the other music will be on the piano. Welcome. The prelude will be number 359, When We Are Gathered. Our opening words are by William Schultz. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. I invite Peter to come forward and light our chalice this morning. Chalice lighting words by Daniel Feria. We light this chalice as a symbol of faith, hope, and love. To face the shadows, a chalice of light. To face iniquity, a chalice of justice. To face falsehood, a chalice of truth. To face evil, a chalice of goodness. To face disharmony, a chalice of beauty. May your brightness, manifestation of the infinite light, bless our hearts, our spirits, and our lives. Please join me in saying the unison affirmation of this church as printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our opening hymn is number 281, O God, our help in ages past. Please rise in body or spirit as we sing this hymn, number 281. I would now like to invite Peter Coffin to come forward and share our presentation on the church architecture. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Reverend. I'm kind of old-fashioned, a mic, but not the lavalier, right? Thank you and welcome. A year ago, I got the privilege and honor to spend a whole sermon on the history of this church and its congregation. And now I'm going to try to distill that into 5 minutes. And yeah, don't ask a Unitarian to talk about his favorite church in 5 minutes or less. Plus, I'm a historian, so 1820s. What life was like back then, can we imagine? And what are those values that still live on today? And I was just struck by the theme, some of the words from the song. Time, like an ever-rolling stream, soon bears us all away. We fly forgotten as a dream, dies at the opening day. 200 years from now, people going to remember me and what I'm saying? I doubt it. I doubt it. But, do we remember what the minister said 200 years ago when they celebrated this church? Unfortunately, no. We don't have those records. But there's still a lot that this church can say to us and for us. Because the last line, well, O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be thou our guard while troubles last and our eternal home. God used to be a central force in our collective lives as Americans. And whether you were a Mason, didn't matter what religion you were, you had to believe in God. We've kind of gotten away from that as a society, and it's causing troubles. And there's going to be political civil war. Are we a Christian nation? Are we open to all? Do we celebrate only on Sunday mornings? Why isn't Friday sacred to us? How do we do that? I don't know. It's a struggle. Some of those values, I would say, need to live on. And I like to think that a belief in something above us, greater than us, to which we can express our thanks and gratitude is my definition of a God. And I'm a proud Unitarian. I'm not sure I'm a Universalist, because I don't believe in heaven or hell, so it doesn't really matter. But I do believe that it's the same God who spoke to Jesus and spoke to Buddha and spoke to Moses and spoke to Muhammad and is still there today. And as evidence of him, her, it is us and the larger creation, the environment, which is our seventh principle, the interconnected web of creation. Who created it? I don't know. But I want to celebrate that, and I want to become a good steward of that, which is the environment, and more specific in this case, a steward of this building. It's not my building. Who owns it? If the church congregation versus church, congregation goes away tomorrow, what happens to this church? Goes back to the owner who gave the land? What about the people on that list outside? There's like 12 of them, 14, detailing exactly how much money they gave to build this building. That was just a structure. Who's going to maintain it? Who keeps the heat? Who paints it every 10 years? Well, I'm already halfway through my 5 minutes and I haven't... But Massachusetts was a congregational entity. The power was in the congregations. Now the towns were separated, that's a state, and the power came from the king to the governor, and then they allowed towns to be created. But a town had to have a minister in order to be a town. Had to be a congregational minister. So for the first 200 years of our existence in Massachusetts, the minister's salary was paid by the taxpayers, the ratepayers of the town. The ratepayers were only those people who owned land. But in New England, that was the vast majority of the population. We didn't have many slaves. We had few indentured servants, but they quickly, labor was so tight, they made a lot of money and got land, because land was cheap. Labor was expensive. So by 1820, we'd lived 200 years, supported by the government, the Congregational Church. That changed that year. I'm not sure if I have the dates exactly right, but I do believe this was the first church built with no public monies. It was those, mostly men, I think there's one or two women on the list, but gave money to pay for the construction of this building. Somebody donated the land, and I bet they hired contractors. I don't think this was like a barn raising where everyone helped build it. But this is like the 5th or 6th meeting. There's a difference between a church and a meeting house. Mendon had 4 or 5 meeting houses. That's where the town hall met. That's where everything happened at the meeting place. Everyone came. Well, what's the difference between that and a church? Those were the issues that were coming up, the separation between religious and civic and the town hall. So the 1820s, the church separates from the state. In the 1820s, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have light. This church was built for the purpose of spreading the word. The acoustics, it was all about, again, unfortunately, the man sitting in that pulpit giving the word from the Bible or however he was inspired. And he was hired for life. And he was a leader of this community, and people looked to him for guidance and marital problems. Probably would have talked with his wife, and that position of the minister was so central. Unfortunately, it's not as central as much anymore, because we don't look to the minister to provide us guidance as to what we should do. But in 1820, they sure did. And in 1820, they had arguments, theological arguments. Trinitarian, Unitarian, is it 3 in 1? Is it one God? Those are serious things that people went to war over and took seriously and built new buildings. And I'm just learning from Jay, and after they built this was the more liberal wing, the Unitarians of the congregation. The more conservative Congregationalists had to build another church. And that worked for 10 or 20 years, and that wasn't good enough for them, so they split. Well, what made those people split? It was individuals in a group saying, no, that's not good enough. And I'm going to take money out of my pocket to build another building and hire another person because I want to hear the right words coming out of that person's mouth. And I'm going to put my money on the line and do it. And it only took 10, 15 people. It only took 10, 20 people. I'm not sure the size of the original congregation. But I know, 1820, well, 20 years later, we hire Adin Ballou, and it's not good enough for him, and he's got radical vision, so he takes half the congregation with him to Hopedale. And that's a good thing. And we struggled on, the Unitarian congregation of Mendon, which is really the first parish society, right? 1880s, they're down to like 10 people. And it was the ladies of the church, the Ladies Alliance. Some woman with money who brought in a minister from Boston to do a Sunday school program over the summer. And that attracted the kids, and that got the families back, and the church grew for another 20 years. Maybe, I don't know. 1920s, 30s, hurting community, I imagine. There weren't too many people in these pulpits. Well, then we got the Uxbridge Unitarian. They're in the same problem, except they got a little more money because the mill owners are the major congregants, and they got money and support and build a fancy new organ and keep the church going. But they didn't have a lot of people in the pews. And so in the 30s, they joined together, and they made the minister give an early morning performance in Uxbridge, ride on his horse, and get here and give the second performance. Well, that worked for 50 years, I guess. And then in the 60s, they said, no, let's combine. the congregation in Uxbridge and the congregation in Mendon, and it's a three-part entity. People don't get this. The congregation pays the salary and pays for the heat. We don't own the building. We get it rent-free. It's owned by the society. Same in Uxbridge. Uxbridge Society owned the building. They came together. They joined their assets to provide one congregation, one minister. Go forward in time, we bounced back and forth between Uxbridge and Mendon for 30 years. We'd hold services here right about now in the cold times of the year, and then in Uxbridge in warmer because it was easier to heat here as opposed to Uxbridge. Mendon, in the 60s, built Goss Hall, the first elevator probably in town, and probably because there was a parishioner who needed help getting up. So in the 60s, they were ahead of their time, building handicapped access available to the community, because this church has its tradition of coming out of the congregational network and being a service to the community. And in the 20s and 30s, this is where the graduation was performed for the high school. This was a community space. You had a large gathering, and I'm proud to say it still serves that function today. And that when the senior citizen doesn't have enough room, they're welcome to use Goss Hall for their celebration. Now, a donation to help pay for the heat is always a good thing, but those tradition lives on, and that purpose is needed in the community. The challenge is how to fill these boxes. People don't go to church anymore. I'm looking around at this audience. Ben, you're in the back. Young. All right. Hal, the under 20s crowd. Not as many of us. Matt, we're getting older. Are we replacing ourselves? No, I don't think so. But that's a challenge. And I've already taken 10 minutes, but let me say very quickly, 1820s. Greece was fighting the Turks for independence. The Greek revival. Up until then, the Federalists had been based on Rome, all this classical architecture. That wasn't good enough by the 1820s. Nah, wanted cleanliness, clean lines. So 1820s, you think of most New England towns built in the 1820s, the town common, all surrounded by the white houses. And they get rid of unnecessary decoration. That comes later, that's Victorian frou-frou. It has some detail, but minimizes it, focuses it around the doors and windows. Everything else is clean and austere. Inside, this is a special place, right? Just the volume. And I would say it's the lights, the windows. It can be cold and windy out there. It's still cold in here, but it's a lot better than out there. And these are fragile walls, but they're strong enough to keep hate out and hold love in. How do you heat this place? Well, that's the box pews. You came with your own coals and a little foot burner, and you're going to be here for 2-3 hours on a Sunday morning, and then you're going to go home, or maybe there's a local, you can have dinner together. You don't have to go all the way back to the farm. Someone will give you a Sunday noontime meal, and then you're going to come back again Sunday afternoon for another 2-3 hours. So you get fresh embers in that brazier, and you bring it in, and the box pews keep out the drafts. And you have that filled with 4 or 5 people. You got a family of 8-9 kids. That's going to keep you warm. Well, they later built stoves, and they had on either side, and the furnace went around. So I'm not sure how it heated. It took the edge off it. And then I'm not sure when they went for the modern furnace. There's one there, and there's another. We have 2 furnaces for 2 buildings. It still is hard to keep this place warm in the winter when that wind blows. They would have had shutters on the windows, and 3/4 of the times of the year, those shutters would be closed because the light is so bright. And it's nice and cool here in the summer. You would open up the windows, let the shutters. So it's all about a place that you can come to hear the word. Not just you, but a couple hundred people together in community. And so it's all about acoustics. The sermon was the most important part. So the minister stood up. His voice carried a little bit better. That got to be a problem to somebody. I'm not sure when they did it. The pulpit got lowered 1.5 feet. Why? Because somebody sitting in this pew, probably a rich congregant, got tired of bending up looking at it. I don't know why. I suspect, I can presume. But it got lowered. Very neatly and artfully done. It's meant to look like a Gothic temple, right? Got the columns. You come in, the formal term is the narthex, the entrance. And then you come into the big room, the nave. This is all taken from the temple in Jerusalem. That this is the gathering place. And then the sanctum sanctorum. Behind that curtain in the temple, that was only the high priest was allowed. And it's the curtain in the temple that supposedly is ripped when Jesus is crucified. So all these are kind of symbols of that early faith. Now, the reason why there's a gold thing up there is there used to be a window there. And before they built Goss Hall, that faces north. That faces pretty much due south. So you got the windows, not heavily on the south, because that's kind of bright light coming in. It'll blinds the organist up there. You got the light coming in on the sides, and on the north, like any artist knows, the light comes in and there's no shadows. It's a clean light. And so if you've got struggling eyes and you're trying to read your sermon, it's good to have some backlight so that you can read, because the candle is kind of spluttering. So the decoration along the tops of the columns, first of all, the columns, the Doric columns, very simple, until you come to the altar. And that is more Corinthian, fancier. Gold, but very focused. Not gold anywhere else. No crucifix. No stained glass. You got a steeple. That's a sign point to heaven. You got an organ. That's a later luxury, but you got music. And this was a place to come and sing and celebrate. I'm not sure of the iconography of this. It's productivity, it's luxury. It's not luxury, it's giving, it's fruitfulness. The flower, I'm sure there's symbolism to that. The main symbol I want to point to is the year, 1820. That's when it was built. And above that, the sun. That has become a Federalist symbol. Federalist was like George Washington, not Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, more New England, the founding fathers, Masons, just about every single one of them, Alexander Hamilton, money, and congregational, yeah, that would play right into that. But during the Constitution, George Washington, president of the Constitution, sat in a fancy chair up front. He was the chairman. And on the top of the chair was that symbol, half of a sun. And after the Constitution was finally passed, Ben Franklin, in his wisdom, said, well, you know, I've been sitting here all this time, this sweaty week. I didn't know if that was a setting sun or a rising sun. And with this successful vote, he said, I'm glad to say that it was a rising sun. And so with that, I'll leave it with the words of Ben Franklin, but also, somebody also said, well, we've got a constitution now and a democracy. Good luck keeping it, because it's not forever if the values are not still instilled in our youth of today. So I've said too much, but thank you. You don't go this way.
Yeah. You can take the handle off. Well, thank you, Peter. We appreciate your sharing the history and the architecture of the congregation. I would like to now invite the ushers to come forward and collect the morning offering. People have been giving to support the life of this church for the last few hundred years. Please contribute generously so the life of this church can continue and provide a home and a beacon for liberal religious values and community in the greater Mendon Uxbridge area. Thank you to all who give of your time, of your talent, of your treasure, and of your heart. The offertory will be number 189, Light of Ages and of Nations. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, ushers. I would now like to invite you into a time of meditation. This will have 3 parts. I have words by Reverend Stephen Schick. Then I will play my singing bowl as I often do in services, which makes a meditative tone, and I invite you to continue in that spirit of prayer and meditation and to feel your breath, to feel your heartbeat, and to listen to the sound of the singing bowl. After that, we will sing Spirit of Life together, number 123. This place has been waiting for us to gather our dreams of justice and peace. This place has been waiting for us to fill it with compassion and loving kindness. This place has been waiting for us to draw from it a breath of love and purpose. This place has been waiting for us to fill it with the urgency of new possibilities. This place has been waiting for us to make it sacred by our coming together. As we reflect on the gifts of this place and of this community, let us experience peace in the moment, peace that we can bring back out with us into the world when we leave this place. My singing bowl this morning is dedicated to peace, for all peacemakers, for all of us. Peace within, peace without. Deep peace. Peace. Celebrating 201 years. Before I begin my sermon, I want to tell you two things. One, it's such a joy and privilege to be with you here today. It is always a joy and privilege to be with you here today as your minister. But this is a special celebration today. And what an honor it is to be able to tell a story of this congregation, to tell your story. And secondly, whenever you write a historical piece, you get this information from lots of others who have spoken and written before you. So I want to give credit to some of the people who I got this information from. I was inspired by Peter's sermon last year. I've been greatly inspired by Dick Grady's writings on Mendon, who I'm glad he's here with us today. The Historical Society folks who have created presentations, I've listened to some of those, so I thank those of you who are here from the Historical Society. Booklets from the church, historical booklets that some of our spiritual ancestors of our faith have written, so many sources, so thank you all for all the inspiration. And I want to say how glad I am, again, that each of you is here today. Some of you have been in this church for decades. Some of you are first-time or second-time visitors today. And many of you are somewhere in between. And welcome also to those of you who are viewing us online. We miss you, Leslie, for instance. It's so good to see all of your smiling faces filling our sanctuary this morning. Let's keep up this momentum after this week. celebrating 201 years in this Mendon church building. How did we get here, meeting as Unitarians in this beautiful meeting house? What are some conflicts and challenges we have faced over the years? Like any story, we have had our share of conflicts and challenges. And yet, I want to highlight the day-to-day good work that has gone on throughout the years. What are some of the many good things that this community has given the world? Mendon was officially incorporated in 1667, and with its incorporation, it needed to have a meeting house and a minister. In January 1668, at the town meeting, selectmen were charged to erect a meeting house upon the cheapest terms they can for the good of the town. John Rayner was the first minister, and Joseph Emerson was the second minister and the first settled minister in Mendon. His salary was 20 pounds a year, but the people also erected a house for him, gave him 40 acres of uncleared land, and 2 pounds of butter annually for every cow kept in place. Joseph Emerson was also the great-great-great-grandfather of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Despite the challenges of living in a frontier town, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons were delivered, care was given, souls nourished. Relationships with settlers and the local Native Americans, the Nipmunks, were not a problem in the very early days, it seems. They got along, traded goods, and even had wrestling matches together. However, within not many years, King Philip's War changed everything. King Philip's War became brutal. In 1676, the settlers' places of worship and homes were destroyed by the Nipmunks, and thus all the settlers cleared out of Mendon. As all their buildings were burned, there was nothing here for them, but they still wanted to come back to Mendon. So after several years, the settlers gradually came back in considerable numbers around 1680. Reverend Emerson never returned. He died in Concord. Despite war, relocation, and resettlement, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons delivered, care was given, souls nourished. The second meeting house was built in the same location as the first, over what we now call Founders Park. It contained only rough seats. Reverend Grindle Rawson was called to be their minister in 1684. In 1690, the town had outgrown its meeting house and voted to build a new one. Thus, the third meeting house was built at the same location. In the 1700s, Mendon was a frontier town. It bordered Rhode Island, as Bellingham, Uxbridge, Upton, Northbridge, Blackstone, and Millville were all still part of Mendon. There was more religious liberty in Rhode Island, and some of that spilled over into southern Massachusetts. In John Metcalfe's Annals of Mendon, he includes lists of names of Quakers and a few Anabaptists who noted their religious affiliation at town meetings so they would not have to pay taxes to the town to support the town church. In 1728, talk of a fourth meeting house was begun. However, it was not until 1737 that it was finally completed. There was a long and bitter controversy over its building, and particularly over its location. At one meeting, someone moved to build 2 meeting houses in Mendon and let the minister preach in whichever one he wished. This vote was not carried. Finally, the fourth meeting house was erected, located near the old cemetery at the corner of Blackstone Street. Some who were angry with this decision undertook to chop it down the night after it was raised. They were discovered, an alarm was given, and the rebels dispersed. When that building was finally demolished in 1849, those axe marks could still be seen on the massive posts. This fourth meeting house was the first meeting house that contained pews. They were built by individuals at their own expense. The town sold the space. By a vote of the General Court in 1766, the south part of Mendon became the South Precinct. It was so far to go to walk or go by horse and buggy from the Millville area to the church and meeting house in the center of Mendon, especially in the winter. Thus, those folks built their own meeting house in the South Precinct. It is still there, the historic Chestnut Hill Meeting House. In 1773, a letter was received by the town from the Committee of Correspondence of Boston, showing wherein our invaluable charter rights and privileges were infringed by sundry acts of the Parliament of Great Britain. Independence from Great Britain was discussed in town meetings here. More than 3 years before Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, its fundamental principles were affirmed in a series of town meetings in Mendon, Massachusetts. When the time came, Minutemen were enrolled and supplies provided. The active resistance for independence was finally won due to many committed patriots like those in Mendon. Despite conflict near and far, babies were born, couples married, people died. Sermons were given, care was shared, souls nourished. In 1796, at a town meeting, it was voted that ownership in a pew in the church can now be transferred by an ordinary bill of sale. Previously, it was much more legally complicated to transfer a pew. The first part of the 19th century was the golden age of Mendon. Its leaders had wealth, intelligence, education, political influence, and social standing. Around 1820, Mendon boasted 3 attorneys, 2 congressmen, an ambassador, a bank president, a state senator, selectman, and superior court justice. These town and church leaders made things happen. They made sure the major road, the post road, would go through Mendon. Traffic meant business and put Mendon on the map. These leaders also drove the vision for a new meeting house. By 1820, historian John Metcalf wrote that the meeting house had become old-fashioned and unsuited to the people of a town like Mendon. It was out of repair. Its architecture was behind the times. It had no bell. It had no spire. 2 men offered land for the new building. Jonathan Russell offered 1.5 acres, a short ways from the center of town. Seth Hastings offered 1 acre and 2 rods from the back of his property in the center of town. Both men also offered to increase their financial subscriptions for the new church as well. Seth Hastings' offer was accepted, and this 1 acre and 2 rods remains the site of our church. I searched for the descendants of Seth Hastings in order to invite them to today's service. I did find and make contact with one of Seth Hastings' descendants, Dan. He was interested to hear about his ancestor and the church and this service. However, he does not live locally and was not able to attend today. I will note that another ancestor of one of the donors of this church painted us this lovely portrait of the church. Vern Thayer, the painter from Milford, gave us this painting last year. And one of his ancestors, his Thayer ancestors, is on the subscription board in the vestibule. So he was with us last year when he presented the painting to us. Anyway, back to the 1820s. The architect, Elias Carter, was hired to design this church. Subscriptions were solicited from the members of the parish, and people generously responded. You can see the plaque that names the donors and amounts given in the vestibule of the church. This church was built only by donations, not from money from the town. The previous houses of worship were meeting houses and were used for town business as well as worship. This building was a church and not ever used for town business. At this time, around the 1820s, it was a common practice to provide rum or beer for the workers on the days when they are doing the work of building. However, the town decided that they make a decree that no one could sell liquor on the meeting house common or on the public highway near it on the days of raising the church. Those workers would need to go down the road a ways if they wanted to buy any liquor when they were working in the church. I wonder if perhaps at that town meeting they remembered what happened after the fourth meeting house was built and the men had come with axes when there had been no law against the workers having liquor in the raising of that meeting house. Concerning our church, John Metcalf wrote, "The meeting house having been completed, the bell hung in the belfry, and the communion table in its place, the edifice was formally dedicated to the public worship of God, Thursday, November 30th, 1820. And all along, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons delivered, care was given, souls nourished." Another change was happening around the same time. The learned Orthodox minister of good conversation, Reverend Doggett, was becoming a Unitarian. A religious controversy had erupted across New England. Calvinists insisted that Christian fellowship must be limited to members in agreement with things like the nature of God and the nature of humans and eternal destiny. Liberal Unitarians insisted that their church covenant could include all who wanted to live a Christian life. Churches split over the Unitarian controversy, and you can see the results of these splits today. In so many town commons across New England, you can see a Unitarian church on one side of the town green and a congregational church on the other side of the town green. While the arguments were primarily theological, it turned into more arguments about who was going to get the church silver and who was going to be able to keep the church building. And this happened in Mendon. The Calvinists who had been part of this congregation left with some of their members of this church and started their own church just slightly down the hill. Reverend Adin Ballou wrote about the church situation he found when he arrived in 1831. And this is from his autobiography. "The first parish and church in Mendon, at the time I took pastoral charge of them, were in a depressing and unpromising condition. The church proper had been reduced by a recent secession to 8 members, mostly superannuated persons, very elderly persons. And attendance on public worship was discouragingly small." He goes on to say, "My predecessor, Reverend Simeon Doggett, had sustained a generally respectable pastorate, but the Calvinists had come in with their fiery zeal and impassioned fury, drawing many away from the staid formalities of the ancient sanctuary of the town. They had built for themselves a house of worship, gathered in a large congregation, and were in an apparently prosperous condition. Adin and his remaining congregation dedicated themselves to their 1831 vision their 1831 version of a membership growth and retention plan. I'd like to see what that plan was. Despite the ebbs and flows of membership through the years, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons delivered, care was given, souls nourished. In January 1831, Adin Ballou had been dismissed from the Milford Universalist Church due to his views as a restorationist. Ballou's belief in a time of limited punishment after death was not popular with some influential Universalists in Milford. They thought that all people go directly into God's presence after death and immediate glory. So they let Adin go, and within a week of Adin's dismissal in Milford, the leadership of the First Congregational Parish of Mendon asked Adin to serve as their minister. This church asked Adin to serve just within a week after he was dismissed from Milford. So the very next Sunday, Adin was serving as pastor of this church, and Adin believed the opportunity to serve here was opening the way to new fields of service and to larger opportunities of usefulness. He was 28 years old, a lot younger than that portrait of him we have in the back. When Adin served in Mendon, he embraced the causes of temperance and abolition. Both of these causes were controversial with some of his parishioners. When Adin embraced the cause, he supported it wholeheartedly. He preached from the causes from the pulpit and from neighboring pulpits. He wrote about these causes in the newspaper he founded. He joined with other like-minded people to promote these causes. Also, when Adin was serving in Mendon, he became passionate about trying to follow the peaceful example of Jesus and live in a community of like-minded individuals who also supported what we would now say pacifism. Ballou and some of his friends were very interested in the ideas and principles of social reform. This group of people established a standard of practical Christianity in 1839. This standard was the first step to creating a Christian utopian community. As I said, we would call their practice pacifism, but they called it non-resistance. To non-resist in any situation where people might be tempted to give into violence. And not even just violence, but hatred or other negative practices. They really wanted to practice peace. And under Ballou's visionary leadership, they decided to begin an experiment in communal living. Ballou and the others wanted to improve society and manifest the kingdom of God on earth. Members of this community were especially involved with abolitionism, temperance, and women's rights. They called their community Fraternal Community Number 1, envisioning that eventually more groups would be formed all across America until the millennial age would be ushered in. It was a grand vision. They organized at Mendon, Massachusetts in 1841 with 32 original members. So at that time, Ballou left his pastorate in Mendon with the other members and bought the old Jones farm a few miles from here in a dale in Milford. And thus they started the community in the Dale of Hope. The Hopedale community existed for about 14 years, far longer than most utopian experiments at that time in America, with the exception of the Shakers. I have a lot more I could say about the early Hopedale community, but I'll save that for another sermon. Eventually, I will say what happened though. The early community dissolved and evolved into both the Hopedale Unitarian Parish, which we have a few members visiting with us today, And also, the Hopedale community also evolved into the town of Hopedale. And so if you go down Hopedale and you see those streets named Peace Street, Freedom Street, Union Street, those were named by Adin in the early community. One of Adin's legacies is that he corresponded with Tolstoy about peaceful non-resistance. And Tolstoy went on to influence Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. And it all started here in Mendon, Massachusetts. We've had a long connection to the Hopedale Unitarian Parish. In fact, in the 1890s, the Unitarian congregation of Mendon shared a minister with the Hopedale Unitarian Parish, the Reverend Lewis Wilson. They both had them as their minister in the mid and late 1890s. Perhaps this helped inspire our collaboration with Uxbridge in the 20th century. Also, I wanted to mention about the ladies of the church. The Joseph Emerson Evening Alliance began in 1934. While women did not have formal leadership roles in church business for much of our history, women have always found a way to be involved and to support the church. There used to be two different women's alliances, the Afternoon Alliance and the Evening Alliance. And even before the alliances began in the 1900s, women joined together at the Ladies' Sewing Circle for many years in the 1800s. Additionally, a Mothers' Club was held during the 1950s. The men of the church tried having their own club in 1949, 1950, but that seems to have been short-lived. The Joseph Emerson Alliance still meets most months and still supports the church in a variety of ways. Looking back to 1936, something significant happened to this church building. The church was struck by lightning. Unfortunately, the steeple was severely damaged, as well as the ceiling. Fortunately, the entire church was saved from being entirely destroyed by fire. And fortunately, many people donated to its restoration, as well as the church receiving some insurance funds, and it was all repaired and brought back to its original glory. Despite natural disaster, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons delivered, care was given, souls nourished. The Unitarian and the Universalist denominations united in 1961, and the Mendon Church joined the Unitarian Universalist Association. Early in the 20th century, the Unitarians in Mendon and the Unitarians in Uxbridge started combining resources. It made sense, as the first church in Uxbridge had been gathered by Reverend Joseph Dorr in 1730, and Reverend Dorr was the minister of this church in Mendon. Throughout much of the 20th century, the two churches of Mendon and Uxbridge shared a minister, but kept services separate. Ministers held two Sunday services, first in Uxbridge and then in Mendon. In the late 1970s, the two congregations began holding a single service. For half of the year, services were held in Uxbridge, and the other half of the year, they were held in Mendon. By 1980, the two churches were beginning to function as one congregation. In 1985, the two churches officially joined together to form the Unitarian Congregation of Mendon and Uxbridge. A tripartite structure was established consisting of two societies and one united congregation. In 2013, the Uxbridge building was sold. And even as change keeps happening, babies were born, couples married, people died, sermons delivered, care was given, souls nourished. It is fascinating to read about all the groups and programs this church has held throughout the years. I'm sure there are many more than the ones I discovered. But here are a few. In the 1980s, a social action forum created an Adin Ballou lectureship on justice and peace. The lectureship was an annual event in which a prominent person was invited to speak. These speakers included Daniel Berrigan, Professor Howard Zinn, and Bernie Sanders, well before his run for president. Members of our congregation were among the first in the UA to use the Cakes for the Queen of Heaven curriculum that celebrates female images of the divine. Over the years, the congregation has supported a Shoalers Club. I had to look up what a shoaler was. It's a kind of sailor. The congregation has held support groups for unemployed people, lesbians, AIDS patients, various AA programs, a feminist lecture series, anti-nuclear activities, a food co-op, an emphasis on Black Lives Matter, and so much more. These last 2 years, we've had a new challenge. We had a pandemic to deal with. Maybe someone who preaches at the 300th anniversary of the church, if they go back and talk about all the challenges, they'll talk about our challenge in 2020 and 2021. Probably they would. So in this pandemic, we streamed services on YouTube and had meetings on Zoom. I started as your new minister in the middle of this pandemic. Because we couldn't do all we wanted to do last year to celebrate our 200th anniversary, and Peter provided a wonderful sermon, but that's all we could really do because we felt like we couldn't invite everyone in. And we couldn't have a potluck afterwards like we're having today, and we couldn't do the other things we're doing. So because we couldn't celebrate our 200th anniversary, we're celebrating our 201st anniversary this year. We are learning to be flexible. We have this remarkable legacy with our church. How can we be inspired by the ancestors of our faith? What can we do to be the best church we can be now? And to make sure we have this legacy to give to those who come after us. What can we do to make sure that babies will be born in this church, that people will be married in this church, and that funerals will be held in this church? What can we do so that inspirational sermons will keep being given in this church? What can we do so that people will continue to be cared for by the ministers and by the parishioners? What can we do so that souls will continue to be nourished here? I would love to hear the vision that each of you might want to share. So if you have visions for this church, what we can do to be the best church we can be, so that people will continue to be born here, married here, have their funerals here, live their lives on a day-to-day basis in this community, and thrive and share the message with the wider world. Please share your thoughts. My vision of this church community of Mendon and Uxbridge is a vision that looks inward and outward, downward and upward. Let me explain. We look inward as a church to take care of one another and to build our church community. We look downward to stay grounded. We look upward to receive the warmth and light and inspiration that the universe provides. We look outward to share the good news of connection, co-creation, and love. Let us look outward to share the good news of connection, co-creation, and love. Let us share it with others in our world beyond this community. And let us do what we can to nourish the ongoing dream that is the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Mendon and Uxbridge. Let us continue to nourish the dream of this congregation that it's held throughout the ages and that continues to be formed in the current moment. Let us recreate this dream and grow and thrive and share the good news that we have with the wider Mendon Uxbridge community. Amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Matt. I would like to invite you into a time of sharing joys and concerns. It's our custom here to light candles for joys and concerns. And I invite you to come forward and take the microphone, introduce yourself, and share what you have to share with the community. And then Peter will light our final candle for us this morning. Is there anyone who would like to share and light a candle? Well, I invite you to come forward, Peter. I would like to ask you to light a candle for joy at our 201st anniversary celebration and gratitude for this church community. Last chance, is there anyone else? And Peter, could you also light a final candle for those things that remain unspoken in our hearts and minds? And if there's anything else you want to add?
So much you could light a candle for. I guess what comes to my mind is the flooding in Canada and the West. It's crazy weather that's popping up all over the place. And so hopefully it'll be a wake-up call to us to get more done. Final candle.
Thank you, Peter. And again, we're lighting the final candle for those things that remain unspoken in our hearts and minds. I have a few announcements this morning. We are having a potluck today. Thank you for all who are participating in that. We'd like to invite all of you to come. And for those of you who are visitors or weren't able to bring anything, we still want you to stay and enjoy the potluck. So no worries, and please come. We would love to have you stay for the potluck. Plenty of food. And there is also a historical display that a few of the parishioners have put together. You can look at that if that is of interest. And we are selling the Alliance cookbooks and the church ornaments, really nice holiday ornaments with an image of the church on them. So those are for sale up there as well. But we hope you stay for coffee, for lunch, to gather and fellowship. A few other announcements. We are continuing to collect donations for the Milford Community Meals Program, and that is a great way that we can do outreach in the wider community to support those folks in the greater Milford area who are food insecure. So there's a box in the front between the sanctuary and Goss Hall. You can put donations there whenever the church is open, or simply leave them on the church steps, and one of us will bring them in. We are looking to have greeters every Sunday to welcome folks that are coming in. It's a very easy job. If you can smile and say hello and pass out a program, you can be a greeter. Just come a few minutes early. So we'd love to have you sign up for that so we can be even more welcoming. And finally, we are having a Hollyberry Fair on the first Saturday of December. I think it's December 4th. And we will have beautiful hand-decorated wreaths for sale, and we will have some really fun raffle baskets and a good time. So I hope you can come out to that as well. We will now have our closing hymn, which is number 358, Rank by Rank, Again We Stand. Number 358, and I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together. Peter, may I ask you to extinguish the chalice? Thank you. Words by Martha Munson. We extinguish this chalice that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again. And please join me in saying the Serenity Prayer, as is the tradition of this congregation. It's printed in the order of service. God grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Peter just said the congregation used to hold hands to say that. Maybe we will get back to that in the future. After the benediction, the postlude will be number 35, Unto Thy Temple, Lord, We Come. Number 35, if you want to sing along with the organ postlude that Matt will play after the benediction. Benediction words are by Leah Derlin Jones, and I wrote the final piece. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love as we go forth from this time and place. Let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Live in peace, share joy, and go forth in love and peace until we are together again. Go in peace. Amen.